Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to watch it. Always very grateful for that. And guys, today we're going to give some advanced tips and theory on fishing bluff banks. Bluff banks, I think, are probably one of the most overlooked structures in a lake. A lot of people don't fish them because there's a lot of complexities to fishing a bluff based upon different conditions you have on a lake that, make it difficult to do sometimes. So we're going to give some tips and advice and sort of go over and give you guys a good seasonal approach to fishing bluff banks in today's video. If you guys hear a little noise out there, it's raining outside right now. It's got a nice little summer thunderstorm, so that's probably what little noise if you hear in the background there. And also guys, all the lures, I'll talk about a bunch of different bluff fishing lures. I'll link them all in my tackle warehouse, link in the description of this video. If you guys would like to pick some up, to fish bluffs with, you can use that link to do so. It's much appreciated there. Okay guys, bluffs are, associated with man-made impoundments. You're not going to have any bluffs on, if you guys live on natural bodies of water, or if you fish down south, you're probably not going to have many bluffs to fish. But bluffs are very common amongst most man-made lakes in the United States, because when a lake is flooded, for the most part, even if it's a lowland lake, you have parts of the lake that have a flat side to it, and you have a part that has a bluff side or a channel side, depending upon how the river runs through the geography when the lake was formed. Because most every outside turn on a river channel or a creek channel has some type of a bluff. Now that bluff may have different composition. It may be just a dirt bank. It can be vertical rock. It can be bluff. It can be a wide range of structures on it. But most lakes do have some type of a bluff structure. Now, not all bluffs are created the same, because you really have two different type of bluffs. You have some bluffs that are just basically drop straight off into deep water into the river channel, like places where the old river channel hits the bank, and those are the bluffs. When you get right close to them, the water is deep, like 5 feet off the bank, the water's super deep. And then you have other bluff banks out there that they can be pretty shallow, because like some of the bluff banks where I fish down at Grand Lake in Oklahoma, you can run over to a bluff bank and you say, man, it's going to be some pretty deep water off of there. And you get 20 foot away from the bank and it's only 3 or 4 feet deep, but the bank itself is super sharp, but that's still a bluff. It just doesn't have the deep water access next to it. Now, both of them can be productive depending upon the time of the year, although overall, you're going to find, or it's been my experience in fishing bluffs, that there's, out of the 3 different type of bluffs you've got the bluffs that are vertical, that drop off super sharp into deep water. And then you have the bluffs that have some type of a gradual taper. And what I mean by gradual taper is that, say for example, they're ledgy a little bit, and you may be 10 foot off of the bank and the water is still 10 feet deeper. So it's dropping off, but it's not like a vertical wall. And then you have those bluffs that have shallow water way out in front of them. Now, for the most part, the least productive bluffs that you're going to fish are the ones that are vertical walls and the ones that are super flat. Now there are times when you can catch fish on those, but for the most part, the best bluffs that you're going to fish are the ones that have a lot of different stair steps coming off it, where it's stair steps, down into deep water at different intervals. So to me, the perfect bluff, if you gave me like a perfect bluff situation to fish, it would be a place where the old channel hit the bank. And say, for example, if my boat is 10 foot off the bluff, I look down and the water is maybe 10 to 20 foot deep, in that range there. That tells me that there's some nice ledge rock coming down that bluff. And the ledge rock and that gradual taper down into deeper water is important, because it gives the bass more cover. Normally associated with those type of bluffs, you have broken rock, you have mixed rock, you have bigger rock, you got small rock. There's just a lot more for the bass to hide around. Now, if you've got the vertical walls like that, a lot of times those fish, all they can do is suspend next to them, because they're not going to be, 30 foot down on the bottom, so they'll be suspended at different areas. And if you have a bluff that's really flat, they could be anywhere. They could be way out off the bluff, they could be right against it, depending exactly how sharp or how flat the slope is. So to keep the video not going for hours and hours, let's just talk about isolating and looking for those premium type bluffs that I just talked about, where you got the gradual stair step. Okay, there's a lot of variables that determine how you want to fish a bluff, and that just depends on the time of the year a lot of times. So there's two things that, in my opinion, that really depend. Once you do find the right type of bluff, there's two variables that will dictate your techniques. Number one is the water clarity, and number two is the water temperature. That's going to tell you a lot of times about how deep those fish are on the bluffs, if they're on the bottom or if they're suspended around it. And then another variable with it is if the lake you fish has any submergent timber out off the bluff banks, because a lot of times those bluff banks, if you have a lake that has timber in it, the timber on those bluff banks are some of the last timber in the lake to actually rot out, because there's a lot of tree growth when the lake was formed a lot of times along those bluffs there. So that's another factor. If you do have a lot of submergent timber like we have here in the Ozarks, like with Table Rock Lake, that will put the fish in a situation where they tend to suspend more on the bluffs, because at Table Rock, you can catch fish suspended out of the trees out of the bluff, or you can catch them up on the rock a little shallower or on the bottom. If you have a lake that doesn't have any timber, that option's sort of out of there for you. So let's talk a little bit about first the water clarity, then we'll talk about the water temperature in relationship to that. It's pretty cut forward, it's pretty cut and dried as far as the water clarity in terms of the dirty of the water. Let's say, for example, you have a lake that's a dirty water lake where you have water visibility of about a foot. If you have situations like that, look for those fish to be right up on the bluff. They're going to be from the bluff down to maybe 5 foot out away from the bluff, depending upon how sharp that angle is. But in general, they're going to be in less than 5 foot of water. So that makes it easy a lot of times. And if you as the water clarity gradually gets cleaner, it's going to give those fish more options. So as you get to 2 to 3 to 4 foot clarity, you're going to find those fish, they will use the shallow water part of it at times based upon the conditions, but they also will pull out deeper and they'll start using that 5 to 10 to 15. And as the water gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner until it gets to the point where it's clear, they will start suspending out there a lot of times. So for example, if we got the 12 inches of water visibility, you can expect those fish to be on the bottom in shallow water close to the rocks. And if you have 10 foot of water visibility, expect those fish to be way out off those bluffs, suspended in some timber, or even suspended out there if there's no timber. They tend to suspend off the bluffs more than they do using the bottom if it's super, super clear, depending upon the time of the year. Now, that sort of goes without saying, but the important part of it, in my opinion, is the water temperature and the time of year in relationship to the bluff. So let me sort of run through some scenarios as far as from winter through, winter, spring, summer, fall, about how they relate to it. In the winter time of the year, it's one of my favorite time of years to fish a bluff, because in the winter you don't have a thermocline, therefore the fish can use the bottom or they can suspend both. And that's what I target. I'll target the fish being deep on those banks or suspended on those banks. So one of my favorite ways is I'll take a jig and I'll cast it to the bluff bank and I'll work it down into 30 to 40 foot of water. I'll actually cast it to the bluff, fish 5, 10, 15, 20, and all the way down to 40. I've caught them down to 40, 45 feet on the bottom in bluffs in the wintertime a lot of times. But my favorite two techniques for fishing bluff banks is with a jerkbait or an Alabama rig. Those are excellent lures for bluffs in the middle of the wintertime. What I usually do with both of those, I'll get parallel to the bluff, and based upon how the angle of the bank is, I'll make that jerkbait or the A-rig, I'll cast it long parallel, and I'll work it down into that zone that I feel the fish are going to be at. If the water visibility is sort of in that 2 to 3 foot range, I'm going to be targeting that 3 to 10 foot zone. If the water is really clear, like over 5 foot clarity, I may move out and target that 5 to 20 foot zone, or excuse me, that 10 to 20 foot zone. But nevertheless, I'm also usually always parallel on the bank in that type of a situation. Now, in the springtime of the year, a lot of people don't realize, but bluffs are great places to fish around the spring, especially if you have lakes that have a mixed species. If you have lakes that have largemouth, spotted bass, and smallmouth, those fish will actually spawn on the bluffs. They will stage on those bluffs during the pre-spawn. They will spawn on the ledges of the bluffs right against the bank, and they will also hang out there after the fish get done spawning on the same bluffs, especially if you've got some cleaner water. So lakes that have water visibilities of around 5 feet or more, great places to fish bluffs in the springtime of the year. The number one technique to use on there is like a Ned rig. A Ned rig or a shaky head is about the only two lures you need. It's like they outproduce any other baits that you can find in a clear water situation. Now, if you're fishing a bluff that has some stained water in the springtime of the year, two baits that work really good is a chatterbait and a spinnerbait. For whatever reason, those fish are going to be up shallower on those rocks. Chatterbait and a spinnerbait are really good areas to fish them in. Now, even this goes all the way through early summer, this type of deal. And another bait that works really good in the post spawn on a bluff I caught them in is a large jerk bait. For some reason, like the big jerk bait, like that Megabass Canada, I've caught a lot of fish in the post spawn. Really good bait for that type of deal in the post spawn. Summertime of the year, a lot of people don't fish bluffs, but you can really catch a lot of good fish on them. Thing about fishing bluffs in the summertime is you got to key on in the shade, and it's an early morning deal. One of my favorite techniques in the summertime is to get out there early on those bluffs where there's a lot of shade coming off them, throw some type of a walking topwater or a buzzbait. This is only going to last for a couple hours, but to me, in summertime on bluff fishing, it gets really tough once that sun gets up. I don't catch many fish on them at all after about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, but summertime can be a really good time of year to catch them on topwaters in the shade. But my next favorite time to fish bluffs, and probably the two time frames I enjoy fishing bluffs more than anything, is the pre-spawn and during the fall time of the year. Fall time of the year is a great time to fish bluffs. The fish, they're starting to move up shallower, they're starting to get a little bit more active. And the number one technique that I use for fishing bluffs in the fall time of the year is burning a spinnerbait. We've talked about this before. Just take a little small spinnerbait like that Megabass SD3 spinnerbait, parallel those bluffs, especially in clear water. If it's got clouds or shade, it's going to be better. If it's got wind, it's even better. But throw that spinnerbait that far off the bank and just burn that spinnerbait that far underneath the water, parallel those bluffs. That's a really, really good way to catch them. And if you have a lake that has dirty water, just get on those banks with a square bill crankbait. If you have water visibility of like less than 1.5 feet or so, square bill crankbait, try to find those bluffs that have some broken rock and mixed rock on it, and that's a really, really good way to catch them. Buzzbait will also work good too. A black buzzbait, if you got some shade on those bluffs, can produce in the fall pretty good. So anyway, guys, that's just a quick overview of some bluff fishing techniques. Like I said, fish use them all year long. The fish never leave the bluffs. There's a population that uses them all the time. So that's the techniques that I use them. It's been most productive for me, and I'll link all the baits in the description of the video here. So really appreciate it, guys. Talk later.